All righty, welcome back to the Unpaid Interns podcast here.
Hold on a second. Setting up your meeting for YouTube. Sorry.
You're good. All righty, welcome back to the Unpaid Interns podcast. Connor Hines joined by Tamar Sher today. Tamar, it is so good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing well, Connor.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Unpaid Interns podcast. Connor Hines joined by Tamar Sher today. Tamar, it is so good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing well, Connor.
Alrighty, welcome back to the Unpaid Interns podcast. Did that just cut out?
Nope, this is just, I don't know why it was going on a loop. Can you hear it anymore? Are you good on your
No, I'm good. We roll with the punches here.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. Obviously, this is the first time that I'm doing this. I'm going live, but
I love it.
Podcasting, I guess, Zoom show. But hi, Connor. Thanks for the introduction. I see that you're in Franklin Hall right now. How is that? How's being in Bloomington?
I am. I've bum rushed it. I broke into Franklin Hall today. It's a little quieter around here. And I mean, Bloomington's pretty quiet too. I know Austin and I have talked about this the past few weeks that I've joined him, but it's just not quite the same in the summertime. It's a good different, but obviously can't wait to see you back here in Bloomington. Can't wait to see everybody else in our program. But hey, in the meantime, this has been great. This has been a great opportunity with the Unpaid Interns show. And another great opportunity. We've got a lot to get to today. We've got a great guest joining us. We've got Bart Fox of ESPN, producer there. He's going to join us in just a few minutes. But before we get to anything else, felt obligated to address, probably the story in the sports world of the last few days. Deshaun Jackson, NFL player, coming out on social media, anti-Semitic remarks. Obviously, that's blown up in the sports world, the way Steven Jackson responded, and really looked like Steven Jackson was supporting Deshaun Jackson for a while. Tamar, I'm going to give you the floor because I know you have a strong stance on this. Obviously, a very, very important, topic in our country right now in terms of social injustice and, in terms of everything that's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement over the past few months. This is just concurrently sort of slid in there. And, this certainly cannot be overlooked either.
Right, Connor. I mean, there are so many injustices happening in our world today and are just really coming to the surface. They've always been there. They've always been underlined. But I really felt that I'd be doing an injustice if we didn't discuss the Deshaun Jackson incident, as he used quotes on his social media platforms from notable anti-Semites such as Hitler. And those were very offensive and harmful to the Jewish community at large, including myself. Deshaun Jackson, and I wrote a little statement so I could get everything in. Someone like Deshaun Jackson that has reached the level of fame that he has a powerful platform, and he had the choice. He had the choice to be positive, rebuild, and repair in this time of social unrest, or be negative, creating a deeper divide and ultimately contributing to the brokenness in our world, our country, and our communities. I in no way want to diminish the importance of addressing racial inequality in our world. This just happened to be an anti-Semitic incident, like you said, and I think it's worth it to have this conversation right now, as hate in all forms is unacceptable. And we must all work to not only stand up for those who are oppressed, but to help educate one another. Now, the sports community in particular has a very powerful voice in our society. So athletes and figures like Jackson have a responsibility not to use their platforms to put out hate, but to promote equality, because people are listening to them and they're following them. Unfortunately, and ultimately, Deshaun used and abused his power, and it was wrong. But the sports community has responded in a positive way by sparking important conversations that must be had. And Deshaun since apologized and agreed to work with rabbis to educate himself on why his statements were hurtful. And players have come forward agreeing to have an education-based conversation with Deshaun. Point is, for all those listening, for you, Connor, this is a time of serious pause in our society. So it's up to us to take this time to educate ourselves and to speak out for the injustices that are rising to the surface. Because like I said, this is a problem. This has always been a problem: anti-Semitism, racial inequality, and the oppression of minorities in all forms. So I really thought it was important today to bring this up, to bring up the anti-Semitic conversations happening, because we do need to stick together and stand together as one people, as Americans, and in general.
No, that's beautifully said. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I've felt so helpless at times through all of this because, you know, whether it be with the Black Lives Matter movement or, you know, now this with Deshaun Jackson, I mean, you hear, you know, time and time again, it's not enough to just say you're not racist. It's not enough to just say you're not, you know, anti-Semitic. And, you know, as someone who has grown up as privileged as I have, it's such a interesting, weird spot to be. But, you know, I echo everything that you're saying, Tamar, obviously, you know, coming from certainly a different point of view. But I thought what L. Duncan said on ESPN on Around the Horn just a couple days ago was, you know, very powerful. And that is, you know, no hierarchy. There's no hierarchy when it comes to bigotry. And, you know, for everything that's been said about the Black Lives Matter movement, this is just as important. And, you know, we talked to Courtney Robb last week, and, you know, I think she has one of the most interesting jobs in sports right now, covering sports and culture and everything that's happening in a place like Mississippi, in a place like Columbus. And, you know, she said something to the effect of sports are always a good microcosm, a good indication of whatever's happening in our society at large. And, you know, I think we're seeing that on a variety of levels right now. So well said there, Tamar. Thank you very much. Just needed to address that at the open today, out the outset. We've got a lot of stuff to get to on today's show, though, beginning with a big announcement from the Big Ten yesterday. All conference play or all play of any kind for Big Ten fall sports, if competition happens at all of that competition will take place inside the conference, inside the Big Ten. Tamar, I just want to get your initial thoughts on that. I think this was something that we saw coming for a long time. Obviously, you talk about mitigating travel and, you know, playing as close to home as you can. It's going to be a weird year in the fall. It's going to be a weird, you know, season in the fall regardless. I think this is just another step in that direction.
Keeping it to conference ultimately is going to make decisions be able to be made quicker, in my perspective. So if you keep it to the Big Ten, you keep it to the Pac-12, they can really execute their plans based on the cases that arise in a quicker fashion. And I think that'll ultimately help in the ease of getting sports back at some capacity, like we've been saying this whole time, getting some normalcy. It's going to be weird. I think you're taking away a lot of those marquee games, that Ohio State, Oregon game that was going to be really big, that cross conference play. And so that's going to be a bit of a bummer. But if this is the call that the Big Ten felt that they needed, and then now the Pac-12 following them needed to make in order to get sports back, to get college football back, this is going to be the best decision.
Yeah. And I've tried my best to stay as positive as possible through all of this, and hoping that we're going to get college athletics in some capacity back in the fall. And, you know, obviously we're seeing the return of sports on so many different levels, as we've talked about time and time again on this show. I can't help but say that it feels a little bit like March all over again, as this might be, you know, the first domino to fall again. It just feels like at times we're pushing a little too much, a little too hard. But hey, if we can get Big Ten athletics in some way, shape, or form back on the field, back on the court in the fall, I'm all for it. Obviously, the Ivy League announced as well that they're not going to play sports at all in the fall. So we're going to come to a time here tomorrow where, you know, it's a matter of whether each conference is going to do their own thing and go to the beat of their own drum, or whether the rest of the Power Five conferences are going to follow the Big Ten and, you know, follow each other. I think that the latter is more likely, just because that's how it works in college sports. But with the Ivy League announcement, I mean, there's so many unknowns right now. But I thought that was certainly interesting and certainly notable that the Ivy League's not going to have competition of any kind in the fall.
Right. And the big question was, what's going to be the fallout? What's going to happen once the Ivy Leagues made the decision? They were the first decision makers when everything was happening in March and to kind of end the sporting events for the rest of the season. So now they're leading the charge again of saying, we're not going to do any fall sports at all. So now I'm going to admit a guest that is an expert on college sports, Bart Fox. He is connecting right now. He's producer of college basketball and college football for ESPN and the Big Ten Network. So we are so lucky to have Bart Fox. Thanks so much for coming on with us. What's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. And not only, Bart, are you a producer for the Big Ten Network, for ESPN, but you're also a Hoosier. So tell us about your life right now, what's been going on in quarantine, and what's kind of life without sports in your position?
Drastically different. This is always my slow time anyway. Producing college football and college basketball, I always get downtime in the spring and through the summer. So that part isn't that different, but having everything shut down, certainly from an industry standpoint, has been a huge thing. I've spent a lot of my time in the first couple months of it doing a lot of Zoom sessions like this with announcers around the country. Announcers, producers, directors, we all love feedback, and we all find that we don't get enough of it. So I started doing these Zoom sessions with announcers all over the country where we would watch games from my computer. I'd share my screen, and throughout the whole broadcast, we'd stop it at any point. If I had something I wanted to say, give feedback, if someone else wanted to stop it. And so those were really, really awesome. I did those early on, did about 30 of them, and really, really great. Then the weather started getting good. I'm in Chicago. And so lately I've been trying to spend as much time on the golf course and outside doing stuff. So that's different. But if I'm not outside doing stuff, I want to be laying on the couch watching the Cubs. And so that's been very, very difficult. I also watch a lot of golf, so it's been great to have golf back. I've watched a little bit of NASCAR, and that's been okay. I'm not the biggest fan, but I've enjoyed watching it. But I love watching golf again. I can't wait for 2 weeks because the baseball season will start, hopefully. But that's what I've been doing, spending a lot of time outside. If the weather, if we get rainy days, I'll do some Zoom sessions. But that's how it's been.
Bart, thanks so much for joining us here. You know, as you talked about there, just for a moment, and you know, as we were discussing before you joined us with the Big Ten's announcement yesterday, we're slowly starting to see sports come back in different capacities. And, you know, athletes and media members alike have been quick through this process to say, like, hey, we don't know any more than the rest of the world right now in terms of when things are going to come back. So I don't expect you to have the answers here, but I'm curious what you've heard specifically from your, you know, colleagues at ESPN in terms of what the fall could look like for live broadcast. You know, whether or not you're going to be traveling at all. What does the broadcast schedule look like, if that's changing at all?
Yeah, you already said you don't expect me to know, and you're accurate. I don't know. Nobody. We all say this, and it's cliche, but we really don't know. And what I like about what the Big Ten announced is that while they don't know for sure that there's going to be fall sports, it's nice that we now have some direction that we can at least start planning toward or thinking toward. We don't know what the schedule is going to look like. We don't know if it's going to start exactly on time. But I like that we can stop getting the questions about what are you hearing? What we're hearing is that the Big Ten is saying if there's fall sports, it will be conference only. And so from the network standpoint, there's been a lot of scenarios from ESPN, BTN, all the networks that cover college athletics and sports in general have had a slew of scenarios, if this, then that, but nothing's announced. It's all very theoretical. In terms of would we travel, would we not, that's still not even decided. I know we've had a lot of calls and a lot of discussions about how can we manage through distancing, precautions, and those will rule the day. For example, in normal times, we'd have a production truck at the football stadium, maybe multiple trucks with a crew. The day before, the crew might be 30 people, and on game day, depending on how big of a game it is, it could be 50, 70, 100, 150 people. And so it's not a manageable number in these days. So the discussions are, okay, who do we not necessarily have to have? So where could we cut things? But also what can be done from a studio? What could be done from somebody's living room? And there's tremendous technology that is either in play or being tested to allow it so that we don't have to have all those people on site. In the production itself, in the production truck itself, there might be on a typical game 15 to 20 people in the truck. Well, you can't have 15 to 20 people in a semi that expands outwardly and be safe. So we've had discussions on what can be eliminated or what can be moved to outside or into maybe another truck, or what part of it can be done from back in the studio. And I'm sorry to say that as of July 10th, from a college football standpoint, we don't know yet. It's being figured out, and it will be figured out. But that's where we stand.
Like you mentioned, yes, now they're saying you have a bit of an answer. Where the Big Ten is going to, if there's fall sports, they are going to play in conference. Now, on the Ivy League's decision, then, do you think that was a bit of a premature call, or what are your opinions on their stance?
No, I don't think anything is premature. I trust that the leadership of every conference and the NCAA and everyone who leads in these things, they haven't sat on their hands and then one day come up with an arbitrary decision that we're going to do that. These are things that they have meeting after meeting, data after data presented to them. So I don't think it was premature by the Ivy League. They have to look out for their own interests. Some have said the fact that the Ivy League doesn't generate the same amount of revenue that the Power Five conferences do, that should be looked at. So it lets the Ivy League look at it differently than maybe the Big Ten would. That may be true. But I think when the Big Ten says, if there's fall sports, this is what we're going to do, that word if is sort of in line, it's more toward what the Ivy League is thinking when they say we're not going to have it. So the Big Ten isn't saying anything definitive. The Ivy League now is, but they're not that far off in how they look at the situation, I believe.
Kind of pivoting a little bit here, obviously we wanted to bring you on because of your role in sports TV production and all of that good stuff. But also because you're an IU grad, you're an IU alum. Did you always know that you wanted to get into sports television? Was there a time where that was a change in your sort of career path? Take us back to your IU days and everything that happened here.
Yeah, so it goes back further than that. In high school, probably even before high school, I always had a love of sports media. Back in high school and before that, I thought I wanted to be a sports writer. That's what I knew of sports media. And so in high school, I got a lot of experience that was mainly because I just sort of took the initiative to do it. I wrote for our high school newspaper. I was a sports editor. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I had a hard time. Like I always felt like I could do something unless someone said no. And even if someone said no, I'd try to find another way to do what I was interested in. So I would call up the Indiana Pacers and say, "This is Bart Fox, sports editor of the Northern Lights." That was our high school paper. And I would request a press credential for that night's Pacer game. And 5 or 6 times, the guy I talked to said, okay. So as a 16, 17-year-old, I would go to Pacer games with my little tape recorder, and I would, before the game, the writers had access to the locker room. So I would go in the locker rooms. I generally didn't go in the Pacers locker rooms. I did it for like the Chicago Bulls when Michael Jordan was in his first or second year. The Celtics came to town, so I wanted to be in Larry Bird's locker room. The Knicks with Patrick Ewing. So I would be in there pregame, and then I'd have a seat on press row. And then I'd be in the press room seeing how the writers do things and how like the media operates when they're not courtside or in the locker room. And then after the game, I'd be back in the locker room elbowing for position with the professional writers. And it was unbelievable experience at 16 and 17 to learn what it's about. So then after that, I thought I might want to be a sports reporter or an anchor. So when I went to IU, I studied journalism and focused on broadcast journalism. And I put a tape together by the end of my 4 years that I thought was okay, but I didn't think my tape was going to stand out. Like when you send tapes to news directors and they get a stack of 200 tapes and they pop one in, watch for 30 seconds. I didn't think mine was going to stand out above the 200. And I may have been right. I might have been wrong. I don't know. But I also did a couple of internships while I was in college, one at Channel 6 in Indianapolis in the sports department. And then 2 summers later, that was as a freshman, I did that. And 2 summers later, before my senior year, I did another internship at the NBC affiliate in Boston in their sports department. And that's where I realized that I really liked the producing part. And so when I graduated in 1990, we all have this idea that we can just get a job right away. And it was the heart of the recession. Nobody was hiring. Everyone was laying off at local TV stations, ESPN, other networks. Nobody was hiring. So the only thing I could do is I got hooked up with ESPN because they were coming to Indianapolis for a golf tournament. And I got hired. I had a connection that I got hired to be a cable puller, basically helping the crew set up all the cable all over the golf course, setting up all the huge cameras. And then at the end of the tournament, you coil it all up and throw it on a huge semi. And that semi drives on to the next one. And I was particularly good at laying out cable that they offered me to go on to the next tournament in Moline, Illinois. So I mean that sort of jokingly, but I was responsible. And so they asked if I wanted to go to the next. They were paying me $50 a day. They weren't paying for any of my travel expenses. No flight, no hotel, no rental car, no meals, anything. And there was another guy there that was in the same situation. He was from Florida and he'd been driving himself around. So he said I could drive over to Moline with him and share a room with him to cut expenses if I want. And so that's how I started. I traveled the country, laying out cable on golf courses, getting paid $50 a day, barely breaking even. But the thing is that I didn't exactly know where it was going to go, but I was enjoying it. I didn't have other offers. And I was making connections, and those connections, the people I met along the way were the key, because whatever you're doing, if you get your foot in anywhere and then the next opportunity is available, based on them knowing you already and trusting you, you're more likely to get that opportunity than someone else. So that's what happened. I stuck around long enough to get opportunities to do the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing. And it was a slow go. I mean, it took a while. I was pulling cable for 6 months. I was a runner, like a gopher. And then I was getting more breaks, and I was doing it for different networks and different stuff. So that's how I got started.
It's fantastic. That's exactly what we learned too in school at IU is, like, I'm sure you learned, get to know everything, every single realm. You start with one thing, divert into another, and just be open to shifting gears constantly. So Bart, we're going to keep on the IU trend. Now, we know, of course, you watched the 87 championship, but were you in New Orleans?
No. The Final Four game against UNLV, we didn't my buddies and I, we didn't even think about driving down to New Orleans. I know a lot of people who did. We went over to Miami of Ohio for the weekend, and 5 or 6 of us watched it together from there and had just the greatest time. And I know that back on campus, after we beat UNLV in the Final Four, the campus was insane. Everyone rushed to the fountain and stuff. For the championship game, we watched it from our fraternity house. There was a sorority over, and we all watched it in the huge formal. And when Keith Smart hit the shot, it was a huge pile-on. It was incredible. And then the pile dispersed so that we could see Syracuse inbound for the final couple seconds, and then we won, and it was a huge pile-on again. And what I remember it all so vividly, it's a long time ago now. It was a really cold day that day. Earlier in the day, it was sort of snowing, sleeting. It was nasty. Then the game ends, and we all know we're running to the fountain. And so our house was like a mile and a half from the fountain. None of us had coats on. We rush out the door. We're sprinting. Like, I don't think we were in the greatest shape, but we were running fast to get to the fountain. The fountain was incredibly, like you could hug, high five, make out with anybody. And it was just the most joyous thing. I got inside the fountain. They were smart to get the water out of the fountain. So I got inside the fountain, which was very difficult because people were standing on the ledge and you had to sort of fight your way through. So I get in, and there's a bunch of us in there, and one of the dolphins or whatever they are, the bracing got broken off. And then people are carrying it through and sort of ramming people in the back. And when I saw that happen, I'm like, I got to get out. So get out. And then we all went over to Kirkwood, which was another mob scene. Hopefully you've seen the photos of it or video, because all of that was just, and so we're on Kirkwood outside for about an hour. And so now we're about 3 hours in. And then we realized it was cold out, because it was all adrenaline. It was all fun. It was all, and just incredible. The most incredible night of college. It was my freshman year, and absolutely amazing. I
got the chills.
Uh-huh.
I want that moment.
I hope you guys get to experience it. Without being there, I could never fully explain to you how insane it is. But imagine the entire student body at the fountain. And then you go over to Kirkwood and everyone's shifted there. Amazing. Obviously we want Indiana to win championships. I hope everybody gets to experience a championship once in their career at IU because of that. Incredible.
Gosh, Connor is coming from California. So obviously that's a big reason and pull to Indiana. You want that moment. And
incredible.
So awesome. And speaking to that as well, are there any other memorable IU sports moments that you've either witnessed or produced, because now you're working with Big Ten Network?
Yeah, and we're not talking top 5 yet, are we?
We can lead into that.
Let's get to that in a moment. There's a few things that I've worked on that are really memorable for me. The first is last fall, I produced the IU football game at Nebraska, where obviously Nebraska's down. They're getting better, and I really believe they're going to get better and better. But IU winning at Nebraska to become bowl eligible was really, really cool. That was a really great experience to produce. In 2014, I was producing a basketball game in Bloomington. It was Iowa against IU, and it was a 7:00 game. And around our crew started setting up around 10 in the morning, and we set our cameras up right away. And about an hour after that, a beam from the top of Assembly Hall came crashing down. Now this is like 11 or 12, it might've been noon, came crashing down and severed a couple seats in Assembly Hall. And I had walked into the arena shortly after it happened, and one of my guys came over and said, those guys over there, it was like management from the arena was looking at it. And the first thing I thought about was, okay, our cameras are up. I'm hoping, like, the cameras are up, but it doesn't mean they're being recorded yet in the truck. But I always tell our guys, as soon as we get the cameras up, start recording, because every 5 or 6 years, we capture something that happens way before the game that is newsworthy. And so I immediately go out to the production truck. I confirm that we were recording. And from one of our angles, you can see the beam falling through the air. And thank goodness it happened in an empty arena. There would have been probable death had that been during the game. I believe what happened was there was a lot of snow on top of Assembly Hall. And then there was a really warm stretch this was like mid-February, a really unseasonably warm stretch where I believe all that snow melted, and the pressure from the water on the roof caused one of the joints to let loose. So anyway, we see it on the video. We alert ESPN that we've got a big news story. I'm working with the athletic director, Fred Glass, to figure out what's going on. We're in constant communication with them, find out that there's no way they can play that night because they don't know if more of these are going to fall. They're trying to assess. And so they wound up postponing the game, but that was big news coverage all day long for us. But the visual of that beam coming down and then seeing the seats sheared, that was a story I won't forget. Another memory, Kelvin Sampson, when he was on the verge of losing his job, we knew that it was imminent. We didn't know. We had a feeling that the game we did at Indiana was probably going to be his last game, and it wound up being true. They worked out a buyout or whatever it was shortly after that. But in our last game, Indiana won the game, and we were interviewing Sampson after the game as he was about to go off. And I told our director, hey, when this interview's over, follow Sampson all the way to the locker room, because I know that when he gets to those black doors by the locker room, they're going to close them behind us. And I wanted the last visual to be sort of euphemistically the doors closing on Sampson's career. And so I counted, the interview ended, and I counted our announcers off the air, but I told them I'm not getting to 0 until those doors shut. So keep talking till the doors shut. And it was just a very good sort of metaphor for what was going on, that his career was basically over there. And then my last memory, it's not about any one particular game, but the atmosphere in Assembly Hall from a producer standpoint. I talk to our announcers a lot about talking less. In general, the industry needs to talk less. Let the visuals carry the day, carry the moment more. At IU, it's a must, because when Assembly Hall gets rocking, whatever the announcers are saying is only getting in the way of enjoying that unbelievable atmosphere. And so we've been able to show, and we do it at a lot of other arenas too, but Assembly Hall looks so good when the house is rocking and the announcers are silent. It is awesome.
You mentioned Indiana football at Nebraska just this past year, and Austin, who helps us out with this show, he and I were able to be at that game for WIUX on the radio, and I was just blown away because, you know, obviously Indiana football, it's not quite the tradition of something like Nebraska football, and even with the season that Nebraska had last fall, I mean, and even with Indiana, I mean, going on to win that game, the atmosphere there, that was something that I'm sure you've seen in other arenas in other cities before. But I mean, that sort of atmosphere for a football game, I had never been a part of before. I mean, even when they were as bad as they were last year.
I say this all the time. Nebraska is the most underrated football town in the entire country. Obviously, they've had their heyday, so a lot of people know how cool it is. But if you want to go to an unbelievable atmosphere because what's really cool about Nebraska is that the town area is about a 2-block walk to the stadium. So you can have your tailgating, but a lot of people do their tailgating at all the restaurants and the bars 2 blocks away. Then they walk over to the stadium. They stay for the whole thing, usually. And then they filter back to the town area. And it's just an incredibly unique atmosphere. And they love their football. They love their football.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great transition into what we like to do here on the show on Fridays. Bart, as you alluded to just a couple minutes ago, for those who have listened to a Friday show before, we like to spice it up a little bit on the Friday show. So let's get into your top 5. Today we're going with top 5. What are we calling this, Tamar? Best IU sports moments? Is that what we're going to ride with?
Yes. That's what we're going to do. And you've already given so many. So if you also have moments that aren't necessarily IU, but you want to address, go for it as well.
So I have 5 that I haven't talked about yet. I was going to put the Final Four and the championship game as one, but because I wasn't at the games, I'll drop it, and I've got a substitute. But
you just got too many to choose from.
Well, these are 5 that that I was in attendance for as a student, or before my work days.
Okay.
All right. So my first one, and they're not all positive. They're the first one is 1989 football at IU. Anthony Thompson was running back, having an unbelievable year. He was at the time a favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, and they were 5-5 going into the Purdue game, final game of the year, and it was going to be a very close vote. But it was largely understood that Indiana needed to have a winning record for some writers to vote for Anthony Thompson. If they lose to Purdue, he'll lose some votes, and it probably doesn't bode well for him. So it was a really dreary game in Bloomington. Like, the weather was like that total mist, cold.
As many Indiana football games are.
Yes, and I have another example in a moment for that too. But it went down to a final field goal. The field goal kicker was Scott Bunnell, and it was a really nasty situation. And he missed the field goal, and Indiana lost the game. And Anthony Thompson lost. He finished second in what at that time was the closest Heisman voting in history. So that stands out. I'm not saying it was Scott Bunnell's fault, but my point is that had Indiana won that game, AT probably wins the Heisman. So that was memorable, but disappointing. My next one is twofold. Well, the first of the Jay Edwards. I don't know if you guys remember Jay Edwards, basketball player. Great player. Didn't finish his IU career, but was one of the great shooters of all time at Indiana. There was a huge game against Michigan in Assembly Hall on I think it was a Sunday, big ABC game, and he hit a shot from the corner. It was a game winner that I remember vividly. Really, really awesome, which leads to the very next Sunday. Now we're playing Illinois, and he hits another shot that would have been the game winner, but from the same spot, I think. But Illinois had a couple seconds left, and Stephen Bardo threw a pass to Nick Anderson, who launched from about 35 or 40 feet for a game winner that was just crushing. But those two Jay Edwards shots, huge shots, were two. My next one is sort of a sports. It's around a sports theme. I was a senior in high school, and I went to Bloomington for Little 500 that year. And it was so fun to be at the Little 500, but the most memorable part of that whole weekend was John Mellencamp played at the football stadium that Saturday night. And it may be the best music moment I've ever experienced. He was in his heyday. Everyone was in a great mood. Like it was a beautiful day in Bloomington. The Little 500 was great. Everyone's partying all day, and then everyone's in a lather from Mellencamp. I didn't even have a seat inside the stadium. On the walkway outside the stadium in the end zones, there were thousands of people, and you heard everything as if you were inside. I mean, the stage was, I might have been closer to the stage than many people who were inside. And just listening to Mellencamp play in Bloomington before, there must have been 70,000 total people, maybe, I don't know. I'll say 100,000 just to make it sound good. Let's not let the facts get in the way. It was incredible. And then my last one, let's see, the last one, which was just in the non-Final Four division, football team beat Michigan my freshman year. It was another really dreary day in Bloomington, misting the whole time. We didn't sit down the whole game, and we beat Michigan 14-10. And we hadn't beaten Michigan in forever. And, Indiana football obviously has not a great history. But when I was getting to Bloomington, the team started to get really good, in part because of Anthony Thompson. But they were Bill Mallory was the coach, and he was doing a great job. And so there was a lot of optimism. When we went into that football game against Michigan thinking, I don't know if we're going to win, but we're pretty good. And we stood the entire game, and it was so awesome. It started in daylight. It was like one of those 3:30 games where it starts in daylight but ends in dark, and with the mist and so memorable. We also beat Ohio State that same season. So to be an Indiana student and get to see Indiana beat Michigan and Ohio State in the same year was incredible. And that Ohio State loss, Earl Bruce referred to that game as the darkest day in Ohio State history, which we were all very proud of. But that's my five. Not
a bad list, and not a bad time to be a student at IU. I think you kind of hit it right at the right time.
We beat Michigan and Ohio State in the same season and won the Final Four. So we're freshmen, and we're like, okay, well, this is how it's supposed to be.
Right. That's the expectation.
We never sniffed it again. So enjoy it while it lasts.
No, that's fantastic. And that's like the time period, like Connor's saying, to be a Hoosier. That's fantastic. Do you have would you say you have a favorite kind of span of time that you loved? Because you've been now in the industry for, how many years has it been for you?
30 years.
30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been covering Indiana for the majority of the time. Is there a time period where right now it's your favorite that you've ever covered?
Oh,
putting you on the spot.
From an IU standpoint, Tom Crean got it rolling. Sampson got it rolling. They were really good, but then he had his issues, so that couldn't be sustained. Tom Crean, it took him a while, but he stuck to his program and got it going pretty well, but he didn't have the consistency from season to season. And I think that's been really frustrating. That up and down, Indiana fans through all the night years, most of the night years anyway, expected really, really good seasons. There were a couple dips here and there. The early, 84-ish, 85, whatever it was, there was a little dip, but they got going again. So since I've been working, Indiana hasn't had that sustained great. And that's why, when we talk about the 87 season, the unfortunate thing about talking about the 87 season is that was more than 30 years ago. And so if we're living on 30 years ago, you got the two of you, I'm sure you've heard people talk about it forever. shouldn't you get to experience it? So that's the frustrating part, is that it shouldn't be us old timers that are having all the stories. You guys should have this. So you guys should want that, and I want that for all the students. So to say, was there a time of greatness? I'd have to go back to when I was in school and the football team was going and the basketball team was going, and there were still some seasons that were good. You know, Indiana making it to the championship game in 2001, a little bit unexpected, but really good. In the early 90s, getting to the Final Four was good, but that was sort of the end of the good of the night run. So I can't say that there's been like a great memorable stretch since.
That's fair.
Hey, enjoy it while it lasts, like you said, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's demand that they get back there.
I'm for it. We'll do it. Now, hopefully we will see a season in some capacity this year, but I also want to ask, I've been curious, you've been to Bloomington many times since graduated, you get to go back and forth there. Where's the first place you go, whether that be food or a spot on campus?
My buddy used to own Scholars Inn. So whenever I would go back, if at all possible, I used to like to go there. We all still go back to Nick's. But places, so when I was in college, I used to study at the Runcible Spoon. And back then it was, as far as I know, because I didn't really go around the whole place. I had my go-to spot. I always just knew it as a coffee shop, but like now it's a restaurant. And back then it was when smoking was still allowed in places. And I used to hate smoking, but there was something quaint about getting a cup of coffee at the Runcible Spoon and sitting down to study. So I go back there some. Where else do we go? That might be it. Well, when I go back with my college buddies, we always go to Buffalo's. We talk about it for weeks, like thinking about, okay, we're gonna go get lunch before we go to a game. Unfortunately, I don't get to go back to a lot of games as a fan. But we've done it a few times, and that's a for sure go-to. Buffalo's and a stop at Nick's is probably in the offing. Yes. Where else should I be going?
Gosh, we've heard a lot of good things about the Tap. We were talking about the Tap fries on last episode, and they were talking about, our guest talked about the fries in comparison to the Nick's fries, and they had a bunch of different sauce options. So Connor and I are newly 21. So we just started going there.
I've gone there a number of times, and obviously Zagreb's. You can't go wrong with Zagreb's.
Well, they just brought back Yogi's. I don't know where you stood on the Yogi's debate, but they brought that back. Obviously, it's not the same, but a lot of people love it. So
when we would be working at Assembly Hall, a lot of times we went to lunch at Yogi's because it was the closest to Assembly Hall. And, we weren't going to go for like the nicest meal ever 4 or 5 hours before a game. We just wanted to get in and out.
Sure.
And so that served us well. When I was in college, the spot where Yogi's was BW3's. I don't know if you ever knew that. But we used to go there on Tuesdays for 10-cent wing night. I think it was 10-cent wing night. If it was 15 cents, don't shoot me. But so I like the spot where Yogi's. Now Yogi's isn't there anymore. They've moved to over.
Yeah, they're down by.
Right?
Yeah, new ownership, I think, and he's down by Taco Bell on Walnut.
Yeah. I'll tell you one night that I wasn't in attendance for, but really wish I was in college. At the Bluebird, Lou Reed was in town at Mellencamp studio. I think he was recording music. That's what I was told. And one night, Mellencamp and Lou Reed, unannounced, showed up at the Bluebird and apparently played a few songs. And a couple friends of mine will talk about it to this day. That small venue with those two. So
That's awesome.
I wasn't there, so I'm not going to 100% confirm it. I'm just telling a story about an opportunity that I missed. Don't miss opportunities. Take all the opportunities you can. If I'm going to give you any advice, don't like say, "Oh, I'm tired. I don't want to go out or do anything." If we get to a point where we can resume having opportunities, take opportunities.
That was going to be my final question for you. What piece of advice to take away? So that was beautiful. And man, has the time flown by. I can't believe we've been able to speak with you for a good 40 minutes. So Bart, thank you so, so much for both spending your time with us today and giving us so many pieces of advice. We so appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good luck to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bart.
All right. Take care.
All right. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Wow, that was fun. And I'm so happy that we've been able to do this together, Connor. Thanks for coming on, being on the pod today. I know you're not typically a Friday guy, but Bart is fantastic, isn't he?
Absolutely. That was a great conversation. I mean, so much so many stories, obviously, but I mean, so much knowledge of Bloomington. That was awesome.
Yeah, and we're going to continue on with IU, of course, next week, and we're going to have many, many more fun guests on our show in the coming weeks. So thank you all for joining us. Connor, thank you so much for opening the show with me today and for being here.
Awesome, Tamar. We will talk soon. Yeah, obviously, we've got so much good stuff ahead lined up on the show this summer. And hey, we're getting closer to having sports back with the Big Ten's announcement yesterday. So exciting times, but this was a fun one today.
Yes, for Unpaid Interns, I'm Tamar Sher with Connor Hines.